A pause can tell you more than 1,000 missiles. That's what analysts noticed first. Ships moving slower than scheduled, drills running too smoothly, commands executed with almost nervous precision. On paper, everything looked flawless, but anyone trained to notice patterns could see it. Discipline that felt rehearsed, control that almost screamed caution. Most people didn't see it. They assumed rising power meant confidence. But confidence, it turns out, can be a mask. Here's the wild part. Washington analysts began cross-checking satellite imagery, open-source footage, and internal reports. What the headline said, unstoppable modernization, didn't match the subtle reality. Tiny delays in communication, brief stalls in maneuvers, units that faltered under minimal disruption. You might think these are small details, but in strategy, small inconsistencies can signal something massive. And it got bigger. The U.S. didn't have to fire a shot. It simply watched. Let China's forces move under observation. Patterns emerged. What seemed flawless on paper exposed hidden vulnerabilities. This wasn't just about a single military or nation. It was about alliances, global economies, and the way power itself is measured. If you thought military dominance was purely firepower, think again. You're about to see how careful observation can quietly dismantle what looks invincible. Here's the thing. This story didn't start with missiles, headlines, or dramatic announcements. It started in the quiet spaces most people never notice. After the Cold War, the U.S. military obsessed over one thing: learning from its own mistakes. Every glitch, misstep, and failure was logged, dissected, and turned into doctrine. Exercises weren't meant to impress. They were designed to break systems, to see if they could survive chaos. Flexibility mattered more than raw firepower. China, meanwhile, built something very different. Hierarchy, loyalty, and control mattered more than initiative. Mistakes were hidden. Formations were rigid. On the surface, it looked perfect, but underneath, it was fragile. Get this, subtle contradictions started appearing. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and open-source footage showed something strange. Units that moved flawlessly during rehearsed drills faltered when even the tiniest disruption occurred. Communications slowed. Air defense networks that should have synchronized perfectly occasionally conflicted. On paper, China looked unstoppable. In practice, hesitation began creeping in. And that raised a quiet but powerful question. Could a system built for control actually fail under pressure? What's wild is how quietly the U.S. began noticing. No headlines, no dramatic reports, just analysts piecing together patterns, tracking behavior over time, watching as cracks slowly widened. And just like that, the tension started building. The system that looked invincible on paper was beginning to reveal its edges. Here's the twist. Those tiny hesitations weren't random. They were a signal, and the U.S. knew it. Exercises were designed to push limits, introducing sudden changes and unexpected disruptions. Each time, Chinese units struggled to adapt. Command slowed. Formation stalled. Decisions that should have been automatic were delayed, sometimes by seconds, sometimes longer. On the surface, it barely registered. But analysts watching could see the cracks forming, subtle yet consistent. A system built for control was showing its fragility. Get this, the U.S. didn't just observe quietly. It turned observation into strategy. Freedom of navigation missions were deliberate, fully visible. Large-scale joint exercises with allies were almost theatrical, designed to be seen. Reports, new tactics, and even doctrine revisions were out in the open. China could see it all, but understanding intent? That was the hard part. And in trying to interpret what they were seeing, Beijing exposed even more about its own weaknesses. What's nuts is how quickly subtle cracks became strategic leverage. Hesitation, over-centralization, and rigid reliance on control weren't minor flaws. They shaped decisions, influenced outcomes, and forced internal recalculations. The military system that once looked unstoppable was now under a quiet, relentless spotlight. And one question hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Could China adapt before these weaknesses became impossible to hide? Check this out. What began as subtle hesitation became pressure that spread far beyond the training grounds. American war games weren't about brute force. They modeled disruption. Logistics delays, communications interference, cyber stress tests. Each time, Chinese forces performed well at first. But when plans changed mid-operation, hesitation crept in. Systems that should have worked together seamlessly faltered. Coordination slowed. Decisions stalled. On paper, Everything looked impressive. In practice, cracks multiplied. Here's the wild part. These weaknesses didn't just stay on paper. Allies began noticing. Japan restructured its defense posture. Australia intensified interoperability drills. NATO expanded its focus eastward. Without firing a single shot, the U.S. had created conditions that forced China to expose itself repeatedly. And in Beijing, planners were starting to wrestle with what they could no longer hide. The more they tried to appear flawless, the more the weaknesses became visible. What's striking is how quickly observation became a tool of influence. Chinese leadership accelerated exercises, pushed readiness displays, and tried to demonstrate control. Yet every public demonstration amplified internal strain. Training accidents rose, equipment failures became harder to hide, and high-level reshuffles quietly undermined confidence. The pattern was undeniable. Exposure had turned into a pressure cooker, and the question lingered, heavy and unavoidable. How long could the system sustain itself under this scrutiny? Here's the kicker. China tried to fight back, but every move seemed to play into the pattern the U.S. had already mapped. Larger drills, faster execution, flashy public demonstrations, they were meant to signal strength. Instead, they highlighted strain. Equipment malfunctions surfaced under the spotlight. Internal reshuffles removed key officers from view, creating gaps in command. What was supposed to look like dominance began revealing fragility. Check this out. The ripple effects weren't confined to the military. Modern forces rely on complex ecosystems, technology, microchips, software integration, logistics networks. A flaw in one corner destabilized the rest. Systems worked independently but struggled together under pressure. Even the most advanced hardware couldn't compensate for hesitation and rigid command. And yet, the world mostly noticed the pageantry, not the cracks beneath. Here's what's wild. The situation forced China into a strategic dilemma with no easy answers. Centralized control slowed decision-making. Attempts to decentralize threatened political stability. Efforts to encourage initiative collided with a culture built on obedience. Meanwhile, the U.S. and its allies quietly adapted, using observation as leverage. Every exposed weakness amplified tension, and one question lingered. Could a superpower remain credible while showing its cracks for all to see? Believe it or not, the ripple effects weren't just about tanks or missiles. They reached the economy, alliances, and the global sense of who holds power. Supply chains subtly shifted. Governments quietly recalculated their strategies. Markets reacted in ways most people never noticed. And the crazy part? None of this required a single shot being fired. Just careful observation, patience, and a bit of strategic patience. Here's the wild twist. The human element started showing cracks too. Officers and planners faced relentless scrutiny. Decisions slowed, hesitation crept in, and even confidence, a key but invisible weapon, began to fray. The systems looked perfect on paper, but when people start doubting, efficiency falters. Small delays multiplied, subtly reshaping outcomes. Now, peep this, the story changes how we think about power. Flashy firepower, massive numbers, and public posturing suddenly matter less than flexibility, foresight, and the ability to adapt under watchful eyes. The U.S. didn't strike. It just revealed weakness and let it speak for itself. And the big question remains, in a world where everything is visible, how do you stay strong without showing cracks? Here's the kicker. China now faces dilemmas that don't have easy solutions. Centralized control slows decisions. Encouraging initiative risks political fallout. Modernizing equipment is one thing, but modernizing culture, mindset, and trust networks? That's a far bigger challenge. And the wild part? The world is watching, quietly measuring, waiting for every subtle move. Check this. The United States and its network of allies must also stay sharp. Observation is a weapon, but only if you adapt alongside it. Complacency is the enemy. The smallest misstep can shift perception, ripple through alliances, and change strategy without a single missile fired. Strength today isn't just measured by firepower. It's measured by foresight, patience, and the ability to withstand scrutiny. And here's the lasting thought. Power isn't just what you wield. It's what others see you do. The story doesn't end with triumph or collapse. It ends with tension, adaptation, and reflection. In a world where everything is visible, the question isn't who is strong, It's who can survive being truly seen. And so the story continues, not with fireworks or dramatic battles, but in quiet observation, patient calculation, and decisions made in the shadows. The U.S. revealed weaknesses not by striking, but by simply watching, learning, and letting patterns speak for themselves. China, meanwhile, faces the challenge of adapting under a global spotlight, where every hesitation can ripple across alliances, economies, and perception itself. Think about it. Power isn't just about weapons or numbers. It's about strategy, patience, and the ability to endure scrutiny. In a world where every move can be tracked, analyzed, and exposed, the strongest systems are often the most flexible, not the largest. History doesn't just favor the bold. It favors the observant, the adaptable, the patient. If this story gave you a new perspective on strategy, power, or the hidden dynamics shaping our world, leave a comment below. Dive into the discussion. Subscribe for more cinematic investigations that reveal the forces shaping our times. Because one thing is certain, the game of global power doesn't end here. It's always evolving, and the next chapter is already unfolding.